All right, we're going to get to some football right now real quick, but we're going to get back to your telephone calls coming up as well. 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. More Knicks coming up. Seth Greenberg in the next hour. Jeremy Fowler is going to join us in the next hour to talk some NFL as well. But with Dan, we got some over-unders here. Interesting because you talked about June 1st and how it could impact Aaron Rodgers, where he ends up, Julio Jones, where he ends up. How about some over-unders real quick on Aaron Rodgers? Here is where, right now, DraftKings has Aaron Rodgers slated to go betting-wise. They still have the Packers at minus 125 as the favorite for where he will be on opening day. But then the next three teams on the list, the Broncos at plus 200, the Raiders at plus 500, the Saints at plus 900, and then the Dolphins, the Washington football team, down the list at plus 1,400, and the L.A. Chargers, which to me that doesn't make any sense.
It does not.
At plus 4,000. They're off the list. The other teams, though, I think you can make an argument that there is a scenario where he could end up in any of those places based on what those teams have at quarterback. So give me your thoughts on that list and where you think he might end up.
So we were looking at this right before the show, and it was like, where will he play week one? But I think what you have to consider is the possibility that he's still on the Packers roster week one, but not playing, right? Like he could sit out games. He might be so dug in on his desire to not play for them that he's willing to sit out training camp and sit out regular season games. Now, the Packers right now are not motivated to trade him. They still think they can patch it up. So they don't have to change their minds on that unless and until they're convinced he's really not going to play. Hey, man, we can keep your $14.7 million salary. We can claw back your $6.8 million roster bonus. We might be able to go after your signing bonus from your contract you signed 3 years ago. And that could benefit us, the Green Bay Packers, financially if you just decide to retire, like Carson Palmer did once upon a time when he didn't want to play for the Bengals anymore. So I think right now as we sit here, the Packers have to be the favorite because it's either he comes back and plays for them or he sits out, and I think it's going to take a while for Green Bay to get to a point where it feels like they have to trade him.
So you don't think June 1st matters nearly as much to Aaron Rodgers as maybe it does to Julio Jones or some of these other players? This is much more of a Hatfields and McCoys, and we're here for a while.
No, and even beyond that, it's Atlanta's motivated to trade Julio Jones. Atlanta doesn't have the salary cap space right now to sign its draft picks. None of the guys they picked in last month's draft are under contract, and it's because they can't afford it. So they have to clear cap space, and the only ways they can do it are restructuring Grady Jarrett's contract, which they don't want to do. It creates a problem next year and beyond. Restructuring Julio's contract, same, or trading him. And that's by far the best option, especially when you consider they have another first-round receiver in Calvin Ridley, who's young, and they just drafted Kyle Pitts, who's going to be, in their estimation, a huge weapon for them in the passing game. So they feel like they have him replaced, and they need the cap space. So, yeah, very different situation from the Packers, who still want Aaron Rodgers to be on their team this year and still think they can find a way to work it out.
So you agree with the odds then, that minus 125 is definitely the favorite?
Yes.
At least in terms of you're right, like the semantics or the technicality of whose team is he on and is he playing, but you like him to still be a Packer.
Because right now, there's something would have to change in terms of the Packers' mindset. Right now, their mindset is they want him back, and they think he can get. And when you call the Packers to ask about a trade, they're telling you, no, we're not trading him. So that would have to change. Whereas if you call the Falcons about Julio Jones, they're like, what do you got? Let's talk. We have to do it. And yeah, post June 1st. And everybody, June 1st, we've been talking about June 1st for months. It's tomorrow. Like the Julio Jones thing, the rubber meets the road at some point, possibly later this week, whereas I think the Aaron Rodgers drags on into the summer.
Well, we got Jeremy Fowler coming up next hour to talk about this. We have a minute left before we have to take a break. What do you think the breaking point is for Green Bay then? I mean, at what point do they finally say, all right, we're trading him?
I think training camp. I think if he misses mandatory minicamp next week and gets fined for that, that's a red flag for them. But if he starts missing weeks and weeks of training camp, that's when I think they have to take him seriously in terms of, I don't want to play for you, I'm willing to stay home or in Hawaii or wherever, or host Jeopardy, whatever else I'm doing that has been a lot of fun this offseason. But I think if you're in the middle of training camp and you still haven't seen him, they have to change their minds.
That's Dan Graziano, knows the NFL inside and out, obviously, one of our senior NFL insiders. I'm Bob Wischusen, just hosting a show here for KJZ on Memorial Day.
Doing an outstanding job.
Yeah, I'm trying, I'm happy to be here with you.
I got to pump him up.
We got Seth Greenberg coming up next hour to continue to talk about the NBA. We got Jeremy Fowler coming up to talk about the NFL as well. The NBA's biggest concern. Read Sports Center is brought to you by Goodyear. Goodyear knows from here on out, every game, it's a chance to create momentum, to make the right pass, the right move, hit the perfect shot. It takes momentum to get through the playoffs, and it takes everything to capture a title. Goodyear, more driven. Guests join us on the Goodyear hotline here on KJZ, and it is presented by Progressive Insurance. Bob Wischusen, Dan Graziano. We're going to get into the football coming up a little bit later on. Again, Dan is going to handicap where the Julios and Aarons of the world are going to end up, because we might find out this week, might get some clarity. We will see, but 888-SAY-ESPN's the telephone number, 888-729-3776. We'll get back to the phones in a sec, but PJ Carlissimo is kind enough to join us now here on the Goodyear hotline on KJZ. And, Coach, we talked a couple of days ago about the games, and the games is what we all want to talk about. And yet here we are again talking about a fan incident of a water bottle zinging past the ear of Kyrie Irving, and he turned around and almost went after a fan in the crowd at Boston. You've been in the NBA basically your whole life. And since the early 90s, you have been a coach or an analyst in this league. Lend some perspective for us. Has it always been this bad? When you were coaching, did players talk about this kind of stuff happening? We're just more conscious about it now? Or do we have a real legit problem with the fans coming after the players in a way that was not the case before?
Well, there's always been an issue, and the players would talk about it, but I think the feeling was it was more isolated. It wasn't like it happened every night. There might have been some cities where you would expect it or see it more. I think I hate to say it, but what's changed a little bit is with the cameras and the scrutiny and the phones, the devices and everything, you don't get away with it now. I think people may have gotten away with it more back when I first started in the league. And, it wasn't like, it happened every night and who did that. But to say that this is the first time it's happening is not accurate. The players would talk about it. But as I said, whether it's fair or not, there was a feeling there were more cities where it might happen. But it wasn't a regular occurrence, and it was more verbal. I really don't remember too much of the arenas where you have to walk through a tunnel or underneath. Yeah, there could be beer coming down every once in a while, or it would probably beer. But I don't think to the extent that it's happening now. But I do think convoluted logic. But the only good thing now is no one's getting away with it. When somebody does something, it's seen, and usually you can identify the person and deal with the person.
Yeah, you're right. There's cameras everywhere. What I'm also wondering is, because, again, you've been in the league forever, around players, coach these players. Do the players feel more empowered, and I think rightfully so in this day and age, to say something about it, to point it out? Like, did guys maybe in the 80s, 90s, guys that you coached, did they just look at it as the cost of doing business, and they would just kind of eat the abuse and say, oh, that's what we have to deal with from fans? And now the guys today just don't do that, that they're going to be a little bit more, hey, like, I don't have to take that, and I'm going to talk about it.
I think there's an element of truth to that for sure. I think the players are much more comfortable being outspoken and commenting on what's going on. That's obviously a bigger sociological issue. But, yeah, I think there's an element of that. I don't think players were scared to say anything. I think you referenced it before by saying that was more the cost. You were yelled at in different arenas. You knew when you were on the road you were going to be abused a little bit. You knew it would be worse in the playoffs, the things that were being said. But, again, not to the extent. The frequency, is that our fourth incident and we're like barely our second week into the playoffs? No. Not with near the frequency now. And I couldn't even venture a guess as to why. I don't know whether the fact that fans weren't in any arenas at all until just a couple of weeks ago, and now all of a sudden being back in arenas, why would that cause them to, behave any worse or behave the way they're behaving? I don't understand it. I don't see it.
Based on the conversations you have with people in the league, and I'm sure you talk to people in the league and you talk to players all the time, What's the level of concern here, big picture wise? I mean, this has gone beyond isolated incidents at this point. Like, how does the league view this in terms of where it all might be headed and what they have to do about it?
I can't speak for the league, but I would imagine they are as angry and as disappointed as you can be with what's happening. There's absolutely no question that the players